Hey, everybody. Welcome to the final show of hashtag SPSM Unpacked. Unfortunately, tonight, Amelia is not going to be joining me. She had to scoot out for work responsibilities. So you just get me, which I'm kind of sorry for, um, but not. I'm not seeking validation. I don't care what April says. I'm working on getting some stuff set up here at the beginning, and we'll be kind of kicking off what we've been teasing as a top 10 wrap up for a couple of things: suicide prevention and social media. I want to go over a few of the shows that happened this year because there were some really incredible shows. Some incredible information coming out of both SPSM and suicide prevention in general. I really want to make sure that everybody kind of gets a little reminder here and there that the year actually went by really fast. And there's a lot that happened during that year. A lot of really huge suicide prevention stuff happened this year. We had the usual conferences where a lot of information was released. We had new data coming out all year long. Obviously, the CDC and other bigger organizations, National Institute for Mental Health, AFSP puts out a lot of stuff, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So all year long, we kind of get a lot of data thrown at us, a lot of new information, a lot of research that gets put out. So I kind of want to go over a few of those things too. I hope that everyone had a good year, and I say that completely unsarcastically. I know that 2016 was mostly a dumpster fire for most people, and we lost a lot of amazing celebrities. I was talking with a few of the SPSM people a couple of days ago about all of the really incredible celebrities that we lost over the year and how that tremendously affects people as well. And to think that, like, we lost David Bowie back in January. Does it seem like it was January? Probably not, right? Let me see here. I'm going to pull up our list so that I'm not just rambling. So let's do a number 10. So we're going to start off our top 10, and number 10 is the post-election triage Huffington Post article that Desiree Stage wrote and released the day or two following the election. And one thing that I was really, really happy to see, obviously everything that she writes, all of her words are amazing and spot on. She somehow is able to just concisely talk about what a lot of people kind of feel. So she's able to capture a lot of those commonalities between a lot of people. But what she did so expertly in this article was to talk about lived experience and how that was a huge piece to why so many people were feeling terrified about, or not terrified, but anxious and uncertain about the way that this country was moving forward after the results from the election. People who had experienced sexual assault, people who had experienced thoughts of suicide, other mental health concerns, a lot of these things, she was able to say, this is why people are worried. People who are posting things, people who are concerned, people who are talking about these things on social media are not whining. They're not sore losers. These are people who have experienced things in their lives that give them historical context that says, I've seen these things before, I've experienced some of these things before. I really don't want that to happen again. I don't want to live in a society, I don't want to live in a culture where those things are potentially, where those experiences are lessened, where they're trivialized, or where those experiences might even be encouraged. And so I just wanted to bring that up as a way to kind of kick off the top 10, because I think that was because it happened so recently, and it was so salient, especially at the time, that that seemed like the perfect top 10, the number 10 for the beginning of the top 10. And I also wanted to say that I think in general sparked a lot of concern, and obviously the SPSM show from last week, we had Dr. John Draper and Bob Philbin from CTL, who's a data scientist, talk about the results and the spike of interactions and contacts through the crisis services available. And one thing I really wanted to kind of bring up again, because I think it was really important, was something that Bart actually brought up. Hugely important. The reason that those services were used more, and especially around that time, was largely due in part to the idea that the awareness of these services has increased tremendously I don't want to use the word tremendously. It's increased substantially over the last several years, especially in the last couple of years after Robin Williams died. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline had a lot of press. The Crisis Text Line had a lot of press in the last couple of years, especially as they've been building their services as well. So when something like the election happens, there are more people out there who know about these services, and they know that they can reach out when they need to, when they start feeling this anxiety and uncertainty. So society has kind of shifted. And this is something that I've ranted about a few different times. But, and this is totally anecdotal, I have no data or evidence to actually support this, but what I have noticed, and up until the election, up until this election cycle, was that over the last couple of years, I started noticing a shift in the way that people were communicating about mental health and suicide prevention, on things like the black holes of the comment section of, like New York Times articles or Washington Post articles or Forbes articles. Even sometimes there were some suicide related Forbes articles. The conversation started shifting away from personal blame or some sort of moral deficit on the person who either attempted or died by suicide, and it started shifting towards trying to find something in society that could be used to blame for that person's experience. And to me, this was a huge shift in the way that people were using, or were trying to explain the experience of suicide, the phenomenon of suicide, rather than it being a merit-based or a moral issue, a moral character flaw with the person who was affected. This is something that that they were influenced by society, whether it's social media, whether it's social pressures like school or friends or whatever, whether it's financial. I mean, there is a lot of blame being put on the financial crisis back in 08 and 09, because we saw some weird data pop up around suicide back then, and then even some longer term data about men in the Middle Ages, white men in the Middle Ages specifically, after the Great Recession. So all of that is to say that it's been very interesting to see this shift from a personal blame, if you will, on someone experiencing thoughts of suicide to trying to figure out how society and culture and social pressures are influencing someone's psyche and their internal pain. So you have that rant now again, and I apologize. I guess I don't know. So Talked about the election. That was number 10, Desiree Stage's Huffington Post article. Okay, so back in the spring, I want to say April or May, Spsm Chat had an amazing show about, sorry, I just clicked on a weird window and something happened. They had a show, they had Craig Bryan on, Dr. Craig Bryan, and this was like brand new information. This was data that had been presented at the American Association of Suicidology conference back in April. But April had been teasing this information for a while. And what it amounted to was, what his research actually started showing is he had a data set of veterans who had died by suicide and their social media data. And so when they analyzed this, they started seeing a lot of really interesting things come up. They had hand-coded this, I believe, with several different people on this project who spent a long time, months and months and months, hand-coding this data, making sure that it was all up to incredible standards. And they started seeing this really interesting information kind of happen. These patterns start developing. And so what they started seeing is with these veterans who had died from suicide, and they had control of other veterans who had died from other circumstances, not suicide. But what they started to see was rather counterintuitive, was that it's not always about what necessarily is being posted or just what is being posted on social media. It's how things are being posted, when they're being posted, in sequence with other things that they're discussing. It's certain characteristics of those posts. So, for instance, when someone posted something related to an event that happened that day and the person's coping strategy, whether that was positive or negative, that said something differently than if the person had just posted about what happened that day. So if the person said, "My boss was a total jackass today, I'm going to go home and get drunk," that meant something entirely different. And I believe it was actually a more negative pattern in that case than if someone just said, "I'm going to go get drunk." Or I'm totally pissed at my boss. So those things, they started seeing patterns that were very interesting, just on the idea of being able to kind of look at these things and saying, okay, so what is actually predicting the suicide behavior, and what sort of things can we look for here? It's one of the first studies that was actually looking at this. It's one of the first studies that was ever published, looking at how these things interacted. So Craig Bryan talked about that on the show. That was an amazing show. That is number 9 on this year's list. Let me pull my list back up. And okay, so, and I think this may have been out in the summer. I talked at the very beginning of the show, kind of how throughout the year we get pummeled with data and information from a whole bunch of different organizations, which is really important. But sometimes it's hard to digest it. Sometimes it's really together. And so it's really important to start, when you do get that information, it's really important to try to file that away somewhere that can make sense for you later. It's easy to find, it's easy to cite if you need to. But the one in particular that I remember, what are we on, 8? Yeah. Number 8 is the CDC report that came out that said that more youth die from suicide than motor vehicle accidents. This is the first time in the history of the United States that statistic was found. That data actually came up. So of course, this was huge information, and as tends to happen with the CDC reports that are put out, a lot of national outlets pick this up, and depending on who the outlet is, and depending on what sort of training that particular journalist has, that it may or may not be decent reporting. Sometimes it's rather terrible reporting. And so what was really cool, and what I think has been happening over the last couple of years, is that some of the larger organizations, like the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, like the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, these places will pick this up and sometimes put out collaborative press releases, like the National Action Alliance tends to do this. And they did this in this case, just saying that, yes, this is a statistic that we're finding, but we need to continue to provide resources. We need to continue to provide the things that we know work, and here those are. And so to be able to address these things in relatively real time as this information is released, important. Again, and Dr. Foreman talks about this all the time, the solution to pollution is dilution. And so when you have all these outlets putting out potentially harmful or negative information, it's really important for the bigger organizations, and really even the smaller organizations. You can do this if you have a local suicide prevention coalition, like in your city or in your county, putting out press releases saying, here's the information, here's what it means, here's what it actually means, and then here's what we can do about it. Here's what we as an organization are doing about it. Here are some resources that everybody can use, and just to use it as another way to promote your mission and to talk about your organization, with the idea that you are trying to actually solve this problem for your audience, for your population. You don't want to use it as a weird way to I don't know, promote your services for funds or whatever. It gets gross. But if you do it in a very respectful, effective way, then it helps, like I said, to dilute that pollution that is out there with some of the misinformation, some of the myths, some of the bad terminology. One of the things that you can do every single time one of these reports are put out is provide the local journalists in your area, and even the bigger outlets who put out terrible articles, you can tweet at them, you can email them, whatever. The reporting on suicide guidelines is, obviously one of the easiest things to provide to journalists. It is going to be the most useful for them. And let me make sure that I have the right URL, because I don't want to tell you the wrong one, but I believe it's reportingonsuicide.org. This is information that was put together through a whole bunch of suicide prevention experts and organizations, including the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Action Alliance, AAS, SPRC, AFSP, Pointer. So there's a lot of really good information on that. It talks a lot about how certain terminology can affect the way that people experience the reports, and the words that you're using, and to try to not make them as traumatic as possible, to make them as least traumatic as possible. I'm going to be clear about that. And like I said, it's just like it's a front and back white paper. I mean, it's really easy to hand out to whoever you're talking to. All right, so I think I've ranted about CDC report enough at this point. Let me pull up my list again. All right. So I don't know that this was really an event per se, but it was definitely something that got a lot of attention this year, something that obviously I'm incredibly passionate about, something that most of, if not all of the SPSMers are really passionate about. But ourdatahelps.org is something that's our number. I don't even know what number we're on. I think we're on number 7, 6. Who's keeping track at this point? It's just me. I don't even know how to count. But now I'm trivializing the whole Our Data Helps thing. But ourdatahelps.org is a really, really good example of how we can use social media to create tools for clinicians to use in treatment with their clients, with their patients, to be able to actually predict potentially, and that's the hope, that's where we want to be, but to be able to predict when someone is reaching a point where they might try to take their life. And so ourdatahelps.org is based off of an idea that Tony Wood, the folks at Quantify, Glenn Coppersmith, a few other people, they realized that there's all this social media data out there, and it is really, really hard to get it. There are certain ways to do it with Twitter. There are certain ways to do it with a couple of other social media platforms, but it's rather difficult. And a lot of it has to go through certain regulatory boards. It has to go through certain standards and protocols that are really, really difficult. The easiest way to get that, the data that is just out there, right, is to have people donate it. And so that's where ourdatahelps.org came in. The idea is that you donate, you sign up on that site. It goes through all of the information that you might need. Okay, so Megan's letting me know that I think I'm on number 7, or she thinks I'm on number 7. Who's on number 7? So you go online, you sign up for Our Data Helps, you create a username, password. I think you can even log in through another social media platform. So they make it really easy to sign up. And then you basically just say what social media information, which data you want to provide for the research that is going on. And you can do Facebook and Twitter, and Fitbit is on there, which is really interesting. So they're looking, they have the potential to look at things like biomarkers and some other things. That may not be the right term, but some of the more physiological connected information. So then you donate your data, they look at it, and they can say, these are the things that might potentially be happening when someone is at the point that they're thinking about killing themselves. That's the hope. Down the line, we're going to have tools for clinicians so that while they were with a patient, with a client, they can say, okay, so this has been going on. What is happening here? We're getting red flags here, and I just want to check in about how things are going. I want to talk to you about suicide. I want to see where you are on the risk assessment scale. I want to talk to you about those things. So what this is actually doing is world changing. It's giving information to clinicians that they've never had. It's giving information to clients that they've never had. That instant kind of real-time feedback. If someone is posting something on social media late at night and the clinician gets an alert saying, hey, this could potentially be concerning, you might want to reach out to your client. That takes a lot of some of the issues that we have right now in crisis services, where we rely heavily on people who are struggling to reach out to us, to reach out to the crisis hotlines, to reach out to their clinicians, or to go to the emergency department, or whatever it is. But it's the onus is on them to do the work. And so when you make it easier to provide them access to care by saying, hey, clinician, your client might be struggling right now, give them a call. And obviously these are services that the clinician or the client would sign up for. It's not like the clinician would sign or call them out of the blue or something. But what this is doing is allowing the clinician, the person, the helper, to reach out to them. What if other people who this person who might be struggling, what if other people in their lives were also alerted? What if certain other helping areas were alerted to contact them? What if other social media platforms were alerted to contact them? You know, somebody could be experiencing something really traumatic, really painful, and then they get a flood of support. You know, how is that going to change things? My guess is probably, but really, I'm kind of just speculating on some of these possibilities, just because it's endless. There are so many different things that could happen with this. The point is, go to ourdatahelps.org, donate your social media data if you haven't already. It's really important. This could be change the world. And that's all I can say about that right now. So I'm gonna look at my list, and thank you, Megan, for keeping me on target here. Now I just have to find the list. This is what happens when you try to do everything by yourself. Okay, so I think I'm just skipping around at this point, just because there was so much that happened this year. And I don't like ranking things because they were all just like really, 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 there's just a lot of good stuff happening this year. We talked a lot about Snapchat tonight on the main Spsm show. You know, and what April was talking about is incredibly important too. April and Bart and Tony all kind of brought this up at different points, but using these platforms that so many people use to connect with them on ways that they're not used to being connected with, having organizations use these types of social media to reach out to people, it's huge. If more organizations did it, and I won't say which ones, but if more of them did it, there might be, you know, an opportunity for a whole bunch of additional support. So organizations, individuals who want to do suicide prevention work, individuals who are already doing suicide prevention work, do a little bit of research and find out what your audience, who the people you want to talk to, what kind of platforms they're using, what social media stuff is happening. If you're targeting youth, Snapchat is obviously going to be a big one, and not even necessarily youth. I don't know what the statistics are for use on Snapchat, but I would assume that it's a pretty wide spectrum and age. But find what's good for you. I mean, find what's good for your efforts. You know, it may turn out that a lot of people in your community use Facebook. Maybe it's time to start investing in some Facebook ads for whatever your suicide prevention efforts are. But again, making sure that you target those appropriately, and then you make those as effective as possible. Do the research. Check on the outcomes as you see them. What kind of metrics are you able to get? What kind of information are you able to use to guide the future efforts that you're doing? It's all very, very critical when it comes to using social media, especially in this kind of setting. And I'm actually wanting to look at a couple of other things here, just because the shows that happened over the year kind of got scattered on this page. And really, I mean, like, just kind of scrolling through here, and I know we're on number 5, and I'm not there yet. But I do want to kind of just briefly remind everybody of the Spsm shows that happened this year. We had NSPL CTL on last week. Mike Conway talked about ethics of social media and suicide prevention. That one was huge. The idea that really we don't know what sort of things are okay to do and what sort of things aren't okay to do when using social media to try to prevent suicide. It seems like something that would be really important to look at. Oh my God, Ali Mattu with his sci-fi and mental health and suicide prevention, and his incredibly touching story about losing his brother to suicide and how that influenced him to really use his platform as a way to reach out to people and talk about mental health and suicide. Wow, I mean, that show was incredible. Everyone was geeking out, and I do not say that sarcastically. All right. What else is on here? Oh yeah, well, and April talked about this too. The Hannah Moak and Kate Hardy episode. Everybody talking about Snapchat again. Zero suicide was big. Tumblr. This actually does bring me to number 5 on our top 10 list. Tumblr is one of those other platforms that is kind of hidden to most people in the professional fields. It's obviously an incredibly popular platform. A lot of people use it. Attended a local social media club presentation where our local library talked about using it as a way of putting out information about some. I mean, they would have, like, you know, these are the books to read for this month. But then they actually had they had just started a new Tumblr account for historical posts from around in the community. So using Tumblr as a way to really, again, focusing on the audience that is good for you. Tumblr has a big literature focus. There are a lot of people on there who like to talk about mental health. So using Tumblr as a way to connect with the mental health and suicide prevention community was huge. I was lucky to be asked to provide some answers to one of their Post It Forward topics, which was like, so it's Post It Forward, it's issue time, but it was focusing on mental health. So Desiree and April and a couple of other people were able to answer some questions that people had sent in specifically about, you know, what they were supposed to do in their situation, if there were resources available for certain things. So that was really cool. And being able to see that kind of work directly on something as new and interesting as Tumblr. I keep wanting to say Spotify, and I'm like, that's not right. That was really cool. I like how I just keep saying everything is really cool. Because it all was. It's all so neat. So that was number 5, was Tumblr, the show and the collaboration that happened. And now I'm trying to see if Megan wants to join the show. So I just sent her a link, and we'll see what happens. So number 5 was Tumblr. It was also really neat, I think, in that Tumblr collaboration to see the different types of responses that happened depending on who was answering them. So April had some responses that, I mean, everybody's responses were amazing. I want to say that first. But April had some responses that were very different than Dez's responses, which were very different than my responses, which were very different from a couple of the other people's responses. So using that as a way to get a diverse uh, intersection of a whole bunch of different possible resources. I wouldn't say advice, but listening and talking about somebody's issue is really, really neat. And to even see that Tumblr was interested in doing something like that was pretty massive. And that was number 5. Number 4. I put this one in there because I thought it was really interesting. Number 4 is about a story of and this happened back in May, but a university president in Ohio came out and started talking about his experience, his lived experience with suicide. So, and I'm just going to kind of read a little bit here, but the president, Santa Ono, said he wanted to send a message that depression is treatable, sufferers can move on with life, and mental illness should not be stigmatized. And this was during a fundraising audience and his Twitter followers. So he used social media very specifically here in revealing that he had twice tried to kill himself during his youth. So this is just one of those examples that that storytelling is incredibly important when it comes to lived experience. To see someone in a position of professional strength and authority come out and tell an entire school and an entire Twitter audience that he had had lived experience and that he had attempted suicide opened up such a space of validation for so many people to hopefully come out and say, I had this issue too. Oh my gosh, how did you have that problem? You're so successful and you're accomplished and all this. Does it get better? And the answer obviously is yes, it can. And so to see talk about it in such a positive, there is hope is possible kind of way is really huge. So I want to read another quote from him. So he said, someone was there for me to help me work through my way through that with medication, and also seeing a professional help me through very dark times in my life. So he's giving some interesting resources here. There's light at the end of the tunnel if you have the proper counseling and support. It's really possible for you to move past that and move back into functioning life. So the response was really, really cool, and he got a lot of really positive feedback, really positive support. So this person who is he's in the School of University of Cincinnati Health. Charles Kahn said it has a powerful effect because it brings it out of the darkness. It brings suicide out of the darkness. So many people have depression and have no one to really discuss it. So, again, just this idea of me too, let's talk about it. What have we started seeing over the last few months, couple years? Every time a celebrity comes out and says, man, I've struggled with depression and thoughts of suicide for a long time. What do we see happen? We see a whole bunch of outlets start popping up and saying, "Hey, look at Vanessa Hudgens. She's using her platform to talk about mental health and suicide." Look at Sarah Silverman. She's using her platform to talk about mental health and depression and suicide, right? So what we're seeing over and over and over again is every single time someone comes out and says, I have struggled, maybe I've attempted, I still struggle quite frequently, but I have ways of coping with it. Here are a couple of those ways. Everybody has their own ways of coping. Here are some resources for those people who need them. I mean, it's incredible. So every time that happens, people are like, oh my God, this is so novel. This is so really cool. And I'm really glad that people are talking about it. When it really should just be happening all the time. Like it shouldn't be huge news every time it does. But these celebrities, these people in positions of authority who are using that position to talk about it, those are the real VIPs. So thanks to this guy, Santa Ono. I hope I got his name right. This guy, just the president of a university, this guy. Yeah, so that is number, oh God, I've lost count again. I think we're on number 5. We're probably on number 4 now. All right, kind of going along with that and kind of talking about how media is playing a role in suicide prevention. You know, we had a lot of concerns about media in general. So there were 2 or 3 movies that came out that really caused some concern. And I'm looking these up because I want to make sure that I get these names right. Christine Chubbuck, who was a woman, a news reporter who had killed herself on air during a live television broadcast, was a big event that happened in the 70s. In the mid 70s. And so there were 2 movies that came out pretty much right after each other. One of them is called Kate Plays Christine, that got some interest. And so, you know, there were a lot of people that had some issues with this. There were a lot of people who had some concerns about using this particular information, this particular concept as a way of garnering a lot of attention for just the tragic side of what had happened, and using it as a way to glamorize suicide, and especially, you know, these really I don't know, the ones that are really gory, the ones that are in your face, the ones that it's all, you know, the surprise stuff that the media uses, the really irresponsible way that the media reports on these things. And so when these movies were reported, or, you know, reportedly coming out, a lot of people in the field had some serious concerns about what would come of this. Would it be positive information? Would there be resources provided for people who were triggered or affected by these things? You know, what was going to be the impact? And so there were a lot of conversations. I think on one of the Spsm Unpacked shows, Des and I actually talked a little bit about some of the concepts about creativity, people in the creative fields using suicide prevention as a plot device, as a narrative device, those kinds of things, and where to draw the line with that. Is there room for censorship? Probably not, right? Probably not appropriate. But it's important to it's important to make sure that those outlets are being used in an effective way. And I am going to stop talking about that one now. Okay, let's do number 3. See if Megan joins. Maybe.
Hi.
Hey, what's up? you're perfectly you're just in time for number three.
Right.
Number three. Do you remember Suicide Prevention Month this year?
Okay.
In September. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And how crazy it was? Crazy, not in like a derogatory way, but like, I mean, so there was a lot of stuff happening. Every September is really, really intense. But do you remember when AFSP had a bunch of people in front of Good Morning America, and the producers started trying to push those people towards the back of the crowd, because they didn't think that the people watching their show, the Americans watching their show, didn't want to have suicide on the brain. Do you remember that?
I do.
What happened? What were some of your thoughts when that happened?
I'm getting a lot of echo, so hold on. Let me see if I can do anything with it. Yes, I do remember that. It was, I just remember watching the breaking news and being like, I can't believe this is happening on Good Morning America. I love AFSP and was surprised that they would just shove everyone off to the side. And,
it was
like a weird lag. I'm sorry.
No worries. Yeah. It's the first time for everything. And Megan, do you want to actually just quickly say who you are? Because I realized that you just jumped on. I'm like, hey, everybody, Megan's here. Do you want to just say who you are?
I am a crisis intervention clinician at Behavioral Health Response in St. Louis. And I've been there about 10 years. And I've been doing Spsm for probably since April of this year, which is when I got on Twitter, and Bart sucked me into Spsm, and I love every minute of it. So
he does that. He's really good at
yes.
Finding ways to take away your free time. But yeah, so AFSP was told that they needed to move back in the crowd, and people went apeshit. They created a hashtag called it was like hashtag suicide on the brain.
Yep.
And everybody was retweeting it. It got just nationwide attention. I don't know. I don't remember ever seeing like an apology or a statement from Good Morning America, from ABC, but they were getting
blown up on social media.
Yeah. So that was one of those kind of flashbulb moments of the year where, because suicide is such a sensitive topic, typically, people do have these kind of misperceptions that, we don't want to talk about it. It's, we don't talk about suicide until 8 o'clock in the morning. What the fuck is that?
Right.
So to see something like that actually get traction in like a positive, hopeful, like, people were pissed at first, but then they started actually like tweeting out like more positive stuff, or like, hey, maybe you could focus on this and try to help this way. And so I don't know, it was very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it was great that people eventually turned it into a message for, hope, and that this is something that people experience and that we shouldn't be putting it on the back burner. And I think that's something we see on the crisis line a lot too. People don't want to ask their loved ones if they're suicidal because they're afraid that that's going to make them have those thoughts. And it's not true.
Right. It's a myth. Yeah, so talking about it can you imagine talking about suicide, even just having the word like suicide prevention in front of however big the audience for GMA is, like, to be able to kind of unveil the bullshit, that the myths that are usually associated with suicide. It would have been amazing.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
They messed up.
Oh, there's that.
So we have 9 minutes left. I think what number are we on, Megan? You were keeping track.
We're not on number 2. I think.
We're on number
yes.
2? Okay. Thank you. Seriously, that's very helpful. For the 6 people who watch this in the future, it's going to be amazing that you were able to keep track of all this. Okay, I only had a couple of other ones on here that I wanted to bring up. So do you know much about this mental health cures legislation that is going through the Senate?
The mental health legislation that what? I'm sorry, there's like a lag and I keep hearing myself over you.
Okay. The mental health legislation that is going through that just got passed through the Senate.
Yes.
It's like I mean, you know anything about that?
A little bit.
Yeah, me too. So that was number 2. No,
good deal.
But what we are seeing, I think, I don't know enough about this latest one to probably talk about it in depth. But what it does do is provide a lot more support for mental health agencies and efforts and initiatives that are ongoing. And so that's good. We like to see that. There was some contention about whether or not there were some shitty writers that were being put into it or whatever. But I think overall what we're actually seeing is a bigger push. Like we had the Clay Hunt bill. That was last summer, I think. That was for the suicide prevention of VAs getting more support. We've started seeing newer SAMHSA funding coming out. We've started seeing a little bit more and more pushes for legislation and for funding for suicide prevention efforts. Were there any that stuck out to you? Do you remember of any that were good? Oh, there is a lag.
There is. I'm just now hearing what you just said. I don't know if it would help if I like went out and back, but yeah, there's definitely a lag.
So any legislation that you remember or that kind of like stuck out to you?
Sorry, my husband.
If you have to go, you can go. You don't need to stay.
No, you're fine. Our kiddo is sleeping, so we don't want to wake him up. But yeah. So, okay.
All right. So mental health legislation is getting a big push. That is really cool. I keep saying this is really cool because everything that happened this year is really cool. All right, so let's leave that at number 2. Mental health legislation. It's happening. More will happen. Things that I actually do remember seeing a few times actually over the last couple months. A bigger push for advocacy and lobbying for crisis center funding. Have you seen some of these things? So like AFSP actually put in this massive push for more, like way more funding for crisis centers. That was kind of in collaboration with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and using some of the wording and the messaging that was going out. But and one of our key points at the Lifeline is that crisis centers are critical to the access of care, and that it's really difficult to do suicide prevention without crisis centers. Yeah. I messed up that messaging, but you get the point. Crisis centers are very critical. They are needed, and so to see some of these bigger agencies and even some kind of bigger pushes at the federal level for funding for these things, that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, we need more money. So I'm all for any of that. I don't want to see any more crisis centers close. Right. So, anything that we can do as far as, legislation or, anything that we can do as far as trying to get more crisis services just makes more sense, because we're routing people away from EDs and that kind of thing by giving them that support in the moment. So, it makes more sense on multiple levels to do that.
Right. Yeah, when you start focusing on the money that it saves, Unfortunately, that's one way that to really get the attention of some of these larger funders. When you start saying, okay, this is how much money is being spent through Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, and this is how much money is being lost at the hospitals because people can't pay. You know, and then if crisis centers are being used to divert these people who aren't probably at a point where they need those services, where someone can de-escalate on a phone rather than have them go in and you know, rack up a bunch of bills. That is
potentially not be traumatized in an emergency room and all of that as well. So
or suffer through, you know, a forced institutionalization or something like that that probably, you know, wouldn't have been necessary. Crisis centers play a major role. And so we definitely need to give them more money.
Yes.
Lots of more money.
Yeah.
And that's my personal
open.
perspective. So if you know a crisis center in your local area, please feel free to donate to them.
Yes. I'm all for donations too. That works.
Free money.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Let's do the last one. If I can figure out what I want to do for the last one. So we talked about...
I like to keep my job too, so.
Yeah, that's important. You don't want to have people taking your job away.
Although if no one ever called and they had suicide thoughts anymore, I'd be okay with that too. So.
Right. And that's one of the things that we always talk about, right, on the crisis lines is like, I wish we didn't have this job. Like, I wish I wasn't employed by something like this. I'm glad that I'm able to help. I'm glad that these people find solace most of the time when they call in. But wouldn't it be an amazing world if crisis hotlines didn't need to exist?
Yes. It would be an absolutely amazing world.
But what can you do?
Yeah. At least we're here. Yeah.
Exactly. I think I may have only had 9 on the list. Is there anything that we got a minute. Is there anything that happened this year that you want to talk about? Anything major that stuck out?
Joined Spsm.
That's huge. That is the biggest, that's the number one.
Right. There we go.
There we go.
There we go. What about you?
You put me back on the spot. Yeah, honestly, the biggest thing for me was getting to continue to work with Spsm. You know, we chatted about this very briefly at the beginning, but like just the idea that so many different collaborations happen because of the connections in this group. The information that is passed from person to person, the shows that are happening because of the hard work that April and Bart and Tony put in to making these happen, the guests that they have on here. I mean, like, this is information that isn't available anywhere else, and it's centrally located.
Yes.
The connections happen like this because it's over social media. Like April was talking about, we all live all over the place, but we're able to collaborate on these massive projects instantly. Not to try to make this sound like a weird cult or anything, because Spsm is definitely not a cult. But
all the connections and community, all the love.
Right.
In one place.
Yeah, in one house.
Yeah, for sure.
One tiny basement in a house.
Yes.
Somewhere. But no, I mean, so honestly, the connections that have formed the collaboration, if you just keep talking to these people, and if you have questions, please keep tweeting at them, keep emailing them, find them on Facebook, friend them, stay in touch with people, keep talking about suicide prevention in this realm, because it's going to change, and it's going to change dramatically over the next couple of years. I
agree. It's an exciting time. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here, Megan. I'm so glad that you joined everything in April, and we're doing stuff. And just because you're here, and I want to tell people this, Megan was awesome enough to write a really, really cool blog that has already received a lot of really positive feedback from people on our end. And that will be going out on Tuesday. So keep your eyes peeled on social media for that blog. And check out Megan's
I do. It's
like an actual blog.
yeah, it's a mamaaoncall.com.
Shameless plug.
Call.com.
And go check that out too, because Megan had a really awesome self-care post from a couple days, or it was last week, but it was incredible. So please go check it out. All right, everybody. This has been #SPSM Unpacked for the first year. This is the first year we did it. So thank you for joining us in 2016. Let's all hope that 2017 is less of a fucking dumpster fire. Bye.
Totally on that. Bye.